How much coffee should you use for 4 cups? Regarding coffee, what you drink and how much you drink can depend on several factors, whether you drink it at home or from an establishment, the type of coffee you drink, and your preferred brewing style. With so many choices available, how do you know how much coffee to use for 4 cups? If you're brewing coffee for a big gathering or want a quick cup in the morning, there's an easy way to figure out the right amount of ground coffee beans to use. Coffee is a simple, universally enjoyed a beverage with a simple recipe: coffee grounds and hot water. But how much coffee should you use for 4 cups? The answer is not as straightforward as you might think. How much coffee for 4 cups? The amount of coffee you should use for 4 cups depends on your personal preference. If you like your coffee strong, you will need to use more coffee grounds than if you prefer a weaker cup. A general rule of thumb is to use 2 tablespoons of coffee per cup. So, for 4 cups, you would need 8 tablespoons of coffee. However, this can vary depending on the type of coffee maker you are using. Some coffee makers require more coffee grounds than others. For example, if you use a French press, you will need more coffee than a drip coffee maker. How much coffee should you use when in doubt? Start with the lower coffee amount and add more if needed. You can always add more coffee grounds, but you can't take them out once they're in. The amount of coffee you need to use for 4 cups depends on the strength of the coffee and how much water you use. Use more coffee grounds if you want a more robust cup of coffee. If you want a weaker cup of coffee, use fewer coffee grounds. Generally, use 2 tablespoons, 10 grams, of coffee grounds for every 4 cups, 960 milliliters, of water. This ratio can be increased or decreased depending on your personal preferences. Remember that the amount of caffeine in your cup of coffee will vary depending on the type of bean used, the brewing method, and other factors. Are you a coffee lover? If so, you're probably wondering how much coffee you should use for 4 cups. The answer depends on a few factors: the coffee beans used, the grind size, and the brewing method. For a light cup of coffee, you'll need about 2 tablespoons of coffee grounds. For a medium cup, use 3 tablespoons. For a strong cup, use 4 tablespoons. Keep in mind that these are general guidelines. You may need to adjust the coffee amount depending on your preferences. If you're using pre-ground coffee, check the package for specific instructions. The grind size can make a big difference in the strength of your coffee. Regarding brewing methods, there are many different ways to make coffee. Some plans will require more coffee than others. For example, if you're using a drip coffee maker, you'll need to use more grounds than if you're making espresso. Experiment and find the perfect amount of coffee for your taste. With a little trial and error, you'll be able to make the perfect cup of coffee every time. The perfect ratio to make 4 cups of coffee. Making great coffee starts with the perfect coffee to water ratio. The ideal balance is between 1 and 2 tablespoons of coffee per 6 ounces of water, depending on how strong you like your coffee. So, for 4 cups of coffee, you would need 8 to 16 tablespoons. If you want to make a more robust cup of coffee, use more coffee grounds. If you prefer a weaker cup of coffee, use less. Experiment with different ratios until you find the perfect strength for your taste buds. Making the perfect cup of coffee isn't always easy. There are many variables to consider, from the type of beans used to the grind size to the water temperature. And let's not forget how much coffee you should use about the water you're using. The perfect ratio of coffee to water depends on many factors, but a general rule of thumb is to use 2 tablespoons, 10 grams, of coffee for every 6 ounces, 180 milliliters, of water. This ratio will produce a strong cup of coffee with a rich flavor. You can use less coffee or more water if you want a weaker cup. Remember that using more coffee will also make your coffee more bitter. Experiment with different ratios until you find one that suits your tastes. And remember, the perfect cup of coffee is the one you like best. Now that we know the perfect ratio of coffee to water, let's talk about how much coffee you should use for 4 cups. You will need 3/4 cup of coffee to make a 12-cup pot. You'll need half a cup of coffee for a 6-cup pool. Additionally, you'll need 1/3 cup of coffee for a 4-cup pot. Of course, these are just general guidelines. If you like your coffee weaker or more vital, you can adjust the amount of coffee accordingly. Just remember that the key to making great coffee is using the correct ratio of coffee to water. What are the key ingredients for the perfect cup of coffee? A few essential items are required to make the perfect cup of coffee. You will need coffee beans first. The coffee beans you use will affect the flavor of your coffee, so choose wisely. Second, you will need water. The quality of the water you use will also affect the taste of your coffee. Be sure to use filtered or bottled water for the best results. Third, you will need milk or cream. This is optional, but it will add creaminess and body to your coffee. Finally, you will need sugar or another sweetener. This is also optional, but it can help balance the bitterness of the coffee beans. Now that you have all your ingredients, it's time to start brewing. The ratio of coffee to water is critical in making a good cup. A general rule of thumb is to use 2 tablespoon of ground coffee for every 6 ounces of water. Thank you for watching. CoffeeEternal.com